The opulent Blackwood Manor stood proudly atop a hill overlooking the quaint town of Millbrook, Connecticut. Its pristine white columns and manicured gardens were a testament to the wealth and influence of the Blackwood family. But behind the grand facade, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of this seemingly perfect world. At the center of this tempest was Lucia Hernandez, a petite woman with kind brown eyes and a heart of gold. At 35, she had spent the last decade working as a housekeeper for the Blackwoods, tending to their every need with unwavering dedication. Despite the often thankless nature of her job, Lucia approached each task with a smile, her gentle humming a constant presence in the cavernous halls of the manor. On this fateful morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Lucia made her way up the winding driveway, her well-worn sneakers crunching against the gravel. She paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the blooming roses that lined the path, flowers she had lovingly tended to over the years. Little did she know that this day would mark the beginning of a journey that would test her resolve, challenge her faith, and ultimately change her life forever. As Lucia entered through the service entrance, she was greeted by an unusual commotion. Raised voices echoed from the main hall, and she quickened her pace, concern etched on her features. Rounding the corner, she came face to face with a scene that made her blood run cold. Victoria Blackwood, the matriarch of the family, stood in the center of the room, her face contorted with rage. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer suit contrasted sharply with the fury in her steel-gray eyes. Beside her, looking equally livid, was her son, Bradley Blackwood, a man in his early 40s with a chiseled jaw and cold blue eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared cross him. "Where is it?" Victoria screeched, her voice reverberating off the marble floors. "Someone has stolen my grandmother's diamond necklace, and I want it found immediately." Lucia's heart raced as she took in the scene. The entire household staff had been summoned, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. She noticed Emily, the young maid who had only started working at the manor a few months ago, trembling visibly in the corner. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood," the butler, Mr. Hawthorne, began in his usual composed manner, "we will conduct a thorough search and dash." "Silence!" Bradley interjected, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is no ordinary piece of jewelry. That necklace is worth millions and has been in our family for generations. Whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing." As Lucia watched the scene unfold, a chill ran down her spine. She had a sinking feeling that this situation was about to take a turn for the worse. "You!" Victoria suddenly exclaimed, her accusing finger pointed directly at Lucia. "You're always skulking about, pretending to clean while you're probably casing the place. I bet you're the one who took it." Lucia felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. "Mrs. Blackwood, I would never dash," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Save your lies!" Bradley interrupted, striding towards her with menace in his eyes. "We've put up with you long enough. Always acting so innocent, so helpful. It was the perfect cover, wasn't it?" Tears welled up in Lucia's eyes as she looked around the room, desperately seeking a friendly face, someone who would stand up for her. But all she saw were averted gazes and uncomfortable shuffling. Even Emily, whom she had taken under her wing, couldn't meet her eyes. "Please," Lucia pleaded, her voice breaking. "I have worked here for 10 years. I would never betray your trust. I love this family as if it were my own." Victoria's laughter was cold and cruel. "Love? Don't make me laugh. You're nothing but a servant, and now we see your true colors. A common thief." As if on cue, the local sheriff, a portly man named Frank Thompson, entered the room. His usual jovial demeanor was replaced by a grim expression as he surveyed the scene. "Sheriff Thompson," Bradley addressed him, his tone dripping with false courtesy. "We've caught our thief. This woman, he gestured dismissively towards Lucia, has stolen a priceless family heirloom. We want her arrested immediately. Lucia felt her world crumbling around her. She thought of her modest apartment in town, of her aging mother who depended on her income, of the life she had built through years of honest, hard work. All of it was about to be destroyed because of a crime she didn't commit. Now hold on a minute, Sheriff Thompson began, his brow furrowed. We can't just go arresting people without evidence. Evidence? Victoria scoffed. She's the only one with access to every room in this house. Who else could it be? As the argument continued, Lucia's mind raced. She knew she was innocent, but how could she prove it? And who would believe the word of a humble housekeeper against the powerful Blackwood family? Just then, a soft voice spoke up from the back of the room. It wasn't Lucia. All heads turned to see Amelia Blackwood, Bradley's teenage daughter, step forward. Her long blonde hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying. Amelia, darling, Victoria said, her voice suddenly sickly sweet. You don't need to defend the help. Go back to your room, this doesn't concern you. But Amelia stood her ground, her chin lifted in defiance. It does concern me, grandmother. Because I know who really took the necklace. A hush fell over the room. Lucia felt a glimmer of hope, even as her heart ached for the obvious distress on the young girl's face. Bradley moved towards his daughter, his expression a mixture of concern and suspicion. Amelia, what are you talking about? How could you possibly know? Amelia took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. Because I saw who took it. It was Mom. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucia watched as shock, disbelief, and then fury crossed Bradley's face. Victoria stumbled backward as if she had been struck, collapsing into a nearby chair. That's impossible, Bradley finally managed to choke out. Your mother is in Europe on a business trip. She's been gone for weeks. Amelia shook her head, her voice growing stronger. No, Dad. She came back last night. I saw her sneaking into grandmother's room. When she came out, she was clutching the necklace. She told me not to say anything. That it was for my own good. As the implications of Amelia's words sank in, chaos erupted in the grand hall. Victoria began wailing dramatically, while Bradley paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair in disbelief. The staff whispered among themselves, shock evident on their faces. Amidst the turmoil, Lucia felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Emily standing beside her, a look of remorse on her young face. I'm so sorry, Lucia, she whispered. I should have spoken up sooner. I was just so scared. Lucia squeezed the girl's hand, offering a small smile despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. It's okay, Mija. You're brave for being here now. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat loudly, bringing a semblance of order to the room. All right, folks. Clearly, we've got ourselves a situation here. Mr. Blackwood, I'm gonna need you to try and contact your wife. As for the rest of you, he looked pointedly at Victoria and Bradley, I think you owe Ms. Hernandez here an apology. Victoria bristled at the suggestion, but Bradley, his face ashen, turned to Lucia. I'm sorry, he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. We jumped to conclusions. It was wrong of us. Lucia stood tall, her dignity intact despite the ordeal she had just endured. Apology accepted, Mr. Blackwood. But if you'll excuse me, I think I need some air. With that, she turned and walked out of the manor, her head held high. As she stepped into the sunlight, Lucia took a deep breath, feeling as if she had just emerged from a dark tunnel. The betrayal stung, but a part of her felt lighter, as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. Little did Lucia know that this was just the beginning. The revelations of that morning would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, test loyalties, and ultimately lead to a transformation that no one in Millbrook could have ever anticipated. As she made her way down the winding driveway, Lucia's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The cruel accusations, the moment of vindication, and the shocking revelation about Mrs. Blackwood all swirled together in a dizzying mix. But amidst the chaos, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity: nothing would ever be the same again. The quaint town of Millbrook sprawled out before her as she reached the bottom of the hill. Its tree-lined streets and charming storefronts had always felt like a world apart from the grandeur of Blackwood Manor. Now, as Lucia walked along the familiar sidewalks, she felt as if she were seeing everything through new eyes. She passed by Rosie's diner, where she often grabbed a quick coffee before her early morning shifts. Through the window, she could see Rosie herself, a plump, friendly woman in her 60s, chatting animatedly with the regulars. For a moment, Lucia was tempted to go inside, to lose herself in the comforting aroma of fresh-baked pies and the warmth of friendly faces. But the weight of the mornings. Events pressed down on her, urging her forward. As she turned the corner onto Maple Street, Lucia nearly collided with a tall, broad-shouldered man exiting the local hardware store. "Whoa there," the man exclaimed, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You okay, Lucia? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lucia looked up into the concerned face of Jack Foster, the town's handyman and one of the kindest souls she knew. His rugged features were creased with worry as he took in her disheveled appearance and tear-stained cheeks. "Oh, Jack," Lucia sighed, feeling the emotions of the day threatening to overwhelm her once again. "You wouldn't believe the morning I've had." Jack's brow furrowed as he guided her to a nearby bench. "Why don't you tell me about it? I've got time, and you look like you could use a friendly ear." As they sat down, Lucia found herself pouring out the whole sordid tale: the missing necklace, the accusations, and the shocking revelation about Mrs. Blackwood. Jack listened intently, his strong hands clenched into fists as Lucia described the cruel treatment she had endured. "Those Blackwoods," he spat when she had finished. "Think they can treat people however they want just because they've got money. It ain't right, Lucia. You deserve better than that." Lucia managed a small smile, touched by Jack's indignation on her behalf. "Thank you, Jack. But what am I going to do now? I can't go back there, not after this. But I need the job, my mother's medical bills, the rent." Jack was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You know," he said slowly, "I've been thinking of hiring some help for a while now. Business has been picking up, and I could use an extra pair of hands. It's not fancy work like you're used to, but it's honest, and I promise you'll be treated with respect." Lucia's eyes widened in surprise. "Jack, are you offering me a job?" He nodded, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "If you want it. I know it's not much, but dash." "It's perfect," Lucia interrupted, impulsively throwing her arms around him in a grateful hug. As she pulled back, she noticed Jack's face had turned an even deeper shade of red, and she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning's drama. Just then, the sound of screeching tires broke the moment. A sleek black car came to a sudden stop in front of them, and out stepped Amelia Blackwood, her face streaked with fresh tears. "Lucia," she cried, rushing towards them. "I've been looking everywhere for you. You have to come back to the house. Everything's falling apart." Lucia stood, torn between her desire to comfort the distraught girl and her reluctance to return to the scene of her humiliation. Jack rose beside her, his protective presence giving her strength. "What's happened, Amelia?" Lucia asked gently. Amelia took a shuddering breath. "It's Mom." She's back, and she and Dad are having a huge fight. Grandmother's threatening to call the police, and I don't know what to do. Please, Lucia. You're the only one who can help." Lucia hesitated, looking between Amelia's pleading face and Jack's concerned one. She thought of the job offer, the chance at a new beginning, free from the drama and cruelty of the Blackwood family. But as she gazed into Amelia's desperate eyes, she knew she couldn't turn her back on the girl who had stood up for her. "All right," Lucia said softly. "I'll come." As she climbed into the car with Amelia, Lucia turned back to Jack. "Thank you for everything. I'll think about your offer." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be here when you're ready, Lucia. Take care of yourself up there." As the car pulled away, speeding back towards Blackwood Manor, Lucia felt as if she were being pulled in two directions. Behind her lay the promise of a simpler life, of kindness and respect. Ahead, the tangled web of the Blackwoods world beckoned, fraught with danger but also, perhaps, the chance to make a real difference. The manor came into view, its imposing silhouette a stark reminder of the morning's events. But as Lucia stepped out of the car, her spine straightened and a look of determination settled on her face. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same grace and dignity that had seen her through countless hardships before. Little did Lucia know that her decision to return to Blackwood Manor would set in motion a series of events that would not only change her life but also unravel decades of secrets, lies, and hidden agendas. As she walked through those grand doors once more, the winds of change began to blow, carrying with them the promise of justice, redemption, and perhaps, just perhaps, a love that would defy all expectations. The moment Lucia stepped back into Blackwood Manor, she was engulfed by a cacophony of raised voices and barely contained chaos. The grand foyer, with its gleaming marble floors and crystal chandeliers, seemed to amplify every shout and accusation. Following the sounds of conflict, Lucia and Amelia made their way to the main living room. The scene that greeted them was one of utter discord. Victoria Blackwood sat rigidly in her favorite armchair, her face a mask of cold fury. Bradley paced back and forth like a caged lion, his usual composure shattered. And there, in the center of it all, stood Catherine Blackwood. Lucia had always thought of Catherine as the epitome of grace and sophistication. The woman she saw now was a far cry from that image. Catherine's designer clothes were rumpled, her perfectly coiffed hair in disarray. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were red-rimmed and wild. "How dare you show your face here?" Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "After what you've done, you have the audacity to return?" Catherine's laugh was brittle, bordering on hysterical. "Oh, that's rich coming from you, Victoria. You, who've been pulling the strings all along. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Bradley stopped his pacing, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "What are you talking about, Catherine? You're the one who stole my mother's necklace. Our daughter saw you." At the mention of Amelia, Catherine's eyes darted to where the girl stood beside Lucia. For a moment, a flicker of guilt crossed her features before being replaced by steely resolve. "Amelia, darling," Catherine said, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry you got caught up in all this. But you have to understand, I did it for us. For our family." Amelia took a step back, instinctively moving closer to Lucia. "But Mom, why? Why would you steal from grandmother?" Catherine's eyes hardened as she turned back to Victoria. "Why don't you tell them, Mother dear? Tell them about the trust fund, about the conditions of the will. Tell them how you've been manipulating us all for years." A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria's face had gone pale, her usual imperious demeanor cracking under the weight of Catherine's accusations. Lucia, feeling increasingly out of place in this family drama, began to edge towards the door. but Bradley's voice stopped her. "Lucia, wait," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Please stay. I think we might need you." Surprised by the request, Lucia nodded silently and remained where she was, feeling Amelia's trembling hand slip into hers. Victoria finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. "You don't understand, Catherine. Everything I've done has been for this family. To protect our legacy, our way of life." "Protect?" Catherine scoffed. "You call what you've done protection? Threatening to disinherit your own son unless he married someone you approved of? Manipulating every aspect of our lives to fit your grand plan?" Bradley's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. "What? Mother, is this true?" Victoria stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "The Blackwood name means something in this town, in this country. I couldn't let it be tarnished by an unsuitable match." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Lucia felt Amelia stiffen beside her, and she squeezed the girl's hand reassuringly. "An unsuitable match?" Bradley repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You mean Sophia, don't you? The woman I loved before you forced me into this farce of a marriage?" Catherine flinched at his words, but her expression remained defiant. "So you see, Bradley? This is what we've been living with. Your mother's puppet master act, pulling our strings to create her perfect little family tableau." "That still doesn't explain why you stole the necklace," Amelia interjected, her young voice cutting through the tension. Catherine sighed, suddenly looking very tired. "The necklace, it was leverage. I found out about a secret clause in your grandfather's will. If the necklace ever left the family's possession, control of the entire Blackwood fortune would revert to a trust, out of Victoria's control. I thought if I took it, I could force her hand, make her release her grip on us." Bradley ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly lost. "This is insane. All of it. Our entire life has been built on lies and manipulation?" As the Blackwoods continued to argue, their voices rising and falling like stormy waves, Lucia found her mind drifting to Jack's offer. The simplicity and honesty of it seemed a world away from the web of deceit she found herself entangled in now. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What in tarnation is going on here?" All heads turned to see Sheriff Thompson standing in the doorway, his usually jovial face creased with concern. "Frank," Bradley acknowledged, his voice weary. "I'm not even sure where to begin." The sheriff's eyes swept the room, taking in the tension-filled tableau before him. His gaze lingered on Catherine, noting her disheveled appearance, before moving to the tear-stained faces of Amelia and Lucia. "Well," he drawled, "seems to me like we've got ourselves a right mess here. Why don't we all take a breath and start from the beginning?" As the Blackwoods began to talk over each other, each trying to present their version of events, Lucia felt a tugging on her sleeve. She looked down to see Amelia, her young face etched with worry. "Lucia," the girl whispered, "I'm scared. What's going to happen to us?" Lucia's heart ached for the child caught in the middle of this adult drama. She knelt down, bringing herself to Amelia's eye level. "I don't know, Mija," she said softly. "But I promise you, I'll be here for you, no matter what." As she comforted Amelia, Lucia didn't notice the way Bradley's gaze lingered on her, a mix of gratitude and something deeper flickering in his eyes. Sheriff Thompson held up his hands, silencing the squabbling family. All right. Here's what we're gonna do. Mrs. Blackwood," he nodded at Catherine, "I'm gonna need you to come down to the station with me. We need to get your statement about this necklace business." Catherine nodded resignedly, some of the fight seeming to leave her. "As for the rest of you," the sheriff continued, "I suggest you take some time to cool off and think about what's really important here. Family's a precious thing, folks. Don't let pride and old grudges tear it apart. As Catherine was led away by the sheriff, an uneasy silence fell over the room. Victoria, looking suddenly old and deflated, sank back into her chair. Bradley stood frozen, his world visibly shaken. It was Amelia who broke the silence. "Dad," she said hesitantly. "Who's Sophia?" Bradley's face softened as he looked at his daughter. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. Lucia, sensing the delicacy of the moment, gently squeezed Amelia's shoulder. "Perhaps that's a conversation for another time, when things have calmed down a bit." Bradley shot her a grateful look. "Lucia's right, sweetheart. It's a long story. One I promise I'll tell you when I've had a chance to process all of this myself." Victoria stirred in her chair. "Bradley, Not now, Mother," Bradley cut her off, his voice firm but not unkind. "I think we all need some time to think." As the family began to disperse, each lost in their own thoughts, Lucia found herself unsure of what to do. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained, yet she felt a responsibility to ensure Amelia was okay. "Lucia?" Bradley's voice startled her out of her reverie. "Could I speak with you for a moment? In private?" Curious and a little apprehensive, Lucia nodded, following Bradley into his study. The room was a reflection of the man himself, tastefully decorated but with the underlying warmth that belied the cold exterior he often presented to the world. Bradley closed the door behind them, then turned to face Lucia. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. "The way we treated you this morning, it was unforgivable. You've been nothing but loyal to this family, and we repaid that loyalty with suspicion and cruelty." Lucia was taken aback by the raw honesty in his words. "Mr. Blackwood, Please," he interrupted gently, "call me Bradley. After everything that's happened, I think we can dispense with the formalities." A small smile tugged at Lucia's lips. "All right. Bradley. Your apology is accepted. But if you don't mind me asking, what happens now?" Bradley sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Lucia was beginning to recognize as a sign of his inner turmoil. "I honestly don't know. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, it's all been turned upside down." Without thinking, Lucia reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. Sometimes, when everything seems to be falling apart, it's an opportunity to rebuild something stronger, something truer. Bradley looked at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that made Lucia's heart skip a beat. "You're a remarkable woman, Lucia Hernandez," he said softly. "I don't think I've ever really seen that before today." Lucia felt a blush creeping up her cheeks. She withdrew her hand, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "I should go check on Amelia," she murmured. Bradley nodded, a hint of regret in his eyes. "Of course. And Lucia? Thank you for everything." As Lucia left the study, her mind was whirling. The events of the day had shaken the very foundations of Blackwood Manor, and she found herself caught in the middle of it all. But as she climbed the grand staircase to find Amelia, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just for the Blackwoods, but for her as well. Little did she know that the revelations of the day were just the beginning. The coming weeks would bring more surprises, more challenges, and perhaps, the chance at a happiness she had never dared to dream of. As Lucia reached the top of the stairs, she heard muffled sobs coming from Amelia's room. Her heart aching for the young girl, she knocked softly on the door. "Amelia? It's Lucia. May I come in?" There was a moment of silence, then a quiet, yes. Lucia entered the room to find Amelia curled up on her bed, hugging a stuffed bear to her chest. The girl's face was tear-stained, her eyes red and puffy. Without hesitation, Lucia sat on the edge of the bed and opened her arms. Amelia practically launched herself into the embrace, fresh tears soaking into Lucia's shirt. "Oh, Mija," Lucia soothed, stroking Amelia's hair. "I know it's been a terrible day. But you've been so brave." Amelia's sobs gradually subsided, replaced by hiccuping breaths. "Everything's ruined," she mumbled into Lucia's shoulder. "Mom's going to jail, Dad's angry, Grandmother's been lying. What's going to happen to us, Lucia?" Lucia gently pulled back, looking Amelia in the eye. "Listen to me, Amelia. Families go through hard times. They fight, they make mistakes. But that doesn't mean everything is ruined. Your parents and your grandmother, they all love you very much. And sometimes, when things fall apart, it's so they can be put back together in a better way." Amelia sniffled, considering Lucia's words. "Do you really think so?" "I do," Lucia said firmly. "And no matter what happens, I promise I'll be here for you. Okay?" Amelia nodded, a tiny smile breaking through her tears. "Okay. Thanks, Lucia. I love you." Lucia felt her heart swell with affection for this sweet, resilient girl. "I love you too, Mija. Now, why don't you try to get some rest? Things often look brighter after a good sleep." As Amelia settled back into her bed, Lucia tucked her in, smoothing the covers with a practiced hand. She was about to leave when Amelia's sleepy voice stopped her. "Lucia? Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course, sweetheart," Lucia replied, settling into the chair by Amelia's bed. As she watched the girls breathing even out, Lucia found herself reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken in just one day. Meanwhile, downstairs, Bradley Blackwood stood in his father's old study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes roamed over the familiar room, the leather-bound books, the antique globe, the family portraits on the walls. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. His gaze landed on a photograph of himself as a young man, standing next to a beautiful woman with wild, curly hair and a mischievous smile. Sophia. The name echoed in his mind, bringing with it a flood of memories he had long suppressed. Bradley set down his glass and picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the outline of Sophia's face. How different would his life have been if he had stood up to his mother all those years ago? If he had chosen love over duty? A soft knock at the door interrupted his musings. "Come in," he called, hastily replacing the photograph. Victoria Blackwood entered the room, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Gone was the imperious matriarch of the morning, in her place stood an aging woman, the weight of her actions visible in the slump of her shoulders. "Bradley," she began, her voice wavering. I know you must hate me right now. But please, let me explain." Bradley turned to face his mother, his expression unreadable. "Explain what, exactly?" "How you manipulated my entire life. How you forced me to give up the woman I loved for your idea of what our family should be." Victoria flinched at his words but pressed on. "I thought I was doing what was best for you, for our family. The Blackwood name, it carries a weight, a responsibility. I was raised to believe that preserving that legacy was the most important thing. More important than your son's happiness?" Bradley's voice was low, controlled, but the hurt behind his words was palpable. Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes. "I see now how wrong I was. Watching you today with Lucia, seeing how she cares for Amelia, it made me realize what truly matters. Family isn't about names or legacies. It's about love, about supporting each other no matter what. Bradley's eyes widened at the mention of Lucia's name. What do you mean, watching me with Lucia? A knowing look crossed Victoria's face, despite her tears. Oh, Bradley. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I've seen the way you look at her. It's the same way you used to look at Sophia. Bradley opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. He couldn't deny the strange flutter he felt in his chest whenever Lucia was near, the way her kind eyes and gentle spirit had begun to thaw something inside him he thought had frozen long ago. Victoria stepped closer, placing a tentative hand on her son's arm. I know I have no right to give you advice after everything I've done. But please, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let pride or fear stand in the way of love. Bradley looked at his mother, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw the regret in her eyes, the genuine remorse. And in that moment, he felt something shift inside him, not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, he said honestly. But I'm willing to try. For Amelia's sake, if nothing else. Victoria nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That's all I can ask for. And Bradley? Whatever you decide to do about Lucia, you have my full support. As Victoria left the room, Bradley turned back to the window, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The mention of Lucia's name had stirred something in him, awakening feelings he had long thought dormant. But could he really pursue something with her? She was his employee, after all. And after the events of the day, would she even want anything to do with the Blackwood family drama? Upstairs, Lucia gently closed Amelia's door, the young girl finally having drifted off to sleep. She leaned against the wall for a moment, exhaustion washing over her. The events of the day had been a whirlwind, and she found herself longing for the simplicity of her small apartment, the comfort of her mother's voice. As she made her way down the grand staircase, Lucia's mind wandered to Jack's job offer. The thought of leaving Blackwood Manor filled her with a mixture of relief and something else. A twinge of regret? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. After all that had happened, how could she even consider staying? Lost in her musings, Lucia didn't notice Bradley emerging from his study until she nearly collided with him at the bottom of the stairs. Oh, she exclaimed, steadying herself against the banister. I'm sorry, Mr. Black, I mean, Bradley. I didn't see you there. Bradley's hand had instinctively reached out to catch her, and now lingered on her arm. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through Lucia. No need to apologize, Bradley said softly, his eyes searching her face. Are you all right? You look exhausted. Lucia managed a small smile. It's been quite a day. Amelia's finally asleep, but I worry about her. She's been through so much. Bradley's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. Thank you for taking care of her, Lucia. I don't know what we'd do without you. The sincerity in his voice caught Lucia off guard. She felt a blush creeping up her cheeks and quickly looked away. It's my job, she murmured. No, Bradley said firmly, gently turning her face back towards him. It's more than that. You've shown more kindness and compassion to this family than we deserve. Especially after how we treated you this morning. Lucia found herself lost in Bradley's intense gaze. She had never been this close to him before, never noticed the flecks of gold in his blue eyes or the faint lines at their corners that hinted at a smile rarely seen. Lucia began, then faltered. What could she say? That despite everything, she cared deeply for this broken family? That somewhere along the way, Blackwood Manor had become more than just a workplace to her? The moment was broken by the sharp ring of the telephone. Bradley reluctantly stepped back, the spell between them dissolving. I should get that, he said, a note of regret in his voice. It's probably the family lawyer. Lucia nodded, suddenly feeling very out of place in the grand foyer. Of course. I'll go tidy up the kitchen. As Bradley disappeared into his study, Lucia made her way to the kitchen, her heart pounding. What had just happened between them? And more importantly, what did it mean? In the kitchen, Lucia busied herself with mindless tasks, wiping down counters, organizing drawers, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind from dwelling on the moment she'd shared with Bradley. But as she worked, a memory surfaced, Jack's kind face, his offer of a simpler life. Lucia sighed, leaning against the counter. How had her life become so complicated? This morning, she had been nothing more than the Blackwoods' housekeeper. Now, she found herself entangled in their family drama, conflicted about her place in their world, and harboring feelings for a man who, until today, had barely seemed to notice her existence. The sound of the kitchen door opening startled Lucia from her reverie. She turned to see Emily, the young maid, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Emily, Lucia said warmly, pushing aside her own troubles. Come in, dear. Are you all right? Emily stepped into the kitchen, wringing her hands nervously. I wanted to apologize, Lucia. For this morning. I should have spoken up when they accused you, but I was so scared. Lucia's heart went out to the girl. She remembered all too well the fear of losing a desperately needed job, of disappointing those who depended on you. Oh, Emily, she said, pulling the young maid into a hug. You have nothing to apologize for. We were all caught off guard by what happened. Emily sniffled against Lucia's shoulder. You're always so kind, even when people don't deserve it. I don't know how you do it. Lucia pulled back, looking Emily in the eye. Kindness is never wasted, Mija. Even in the darkest times, it's the light that guides us through. As she comforted Emily, Lucia felt some of her own turmoil settle. Yes, her situation was complicated, but her path forward was clear. She would continue to do what she had always done, offer kindness and support to those who needed it, regardless of the cost to herself. Meanwhile, in his study, Bradley paced back and forth as he listened to his lawyer drone on about the potential legal ramifications of Catherine's actions. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment on the stairs with Lucia. Are you listening, Bradley? The sharp voice of his lawyer, Richard Thornton, cut through his thoughts. Yes, Bradley said distractedly. You were saying something about the trust fund? Richard sighed audibly. This is serious, Bradley. If what Catherine says about your mother's manipulation of the will is true, we could be looking at a major legal battle. Not to mention the potential damage to the Blackwood name if this gets out. At the mention of the Blackwood name, Bradley felt a surge of anger. The Blackwood name, he spat. That's all anyone in this family has ever cared about. Well, look where it's gotten us. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Richard spoke again, his tone was gentler. Bradley, I've known you since we were boys. I've never heard you talk like this before. What's really going on? Bradley sank into his leather chair, suddenly feeling very tired. I don't know, Rich. It's like I've woken up from a long sleep. I'm looking at my life, at the choices I've made, or rather, the choices that were made for me, and I'm wondering, is this really who I want to be? This is about Sophia, isn't it? Richard asked softly. Bradley closed his eyes, memories washing over him. Sophia, with her wild curls and infectious laugh. Sophia, who had loved him for who he was, not for his family name or his bank account. Sophia, who he had let slip away because he hadn't been strong enough to stand up to his mother. It's about Sophia, Bradley admitted. But it's also about someone else. There was a knowing chuckle from Richard. Ah, I see. And would this someone else happen to be a certain kind-hearted housekeeper? Bradley felt his face grow warm. Was he really that transparent? How did you dash? Please, Richard interrupted. I may be just a stuffy old lawyer, but I'm not blind. I've seen the way you look at her, Bradley. It's the same way you used to look at Sophia. Bradley leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. It doesn't matter anyway. After everything that's happened, I doubt Lucia would want anything to do with me or this family's drama. Don't be so sure, Richard said. From what I've seen, that woman has a heart of gold. And more importantly, she seems to genuinely care about you and Amelia. A spark of hope flickered in Bradley's chest. You really think so? I do, Richard affirmed. But Bradley, if you're serious about this, you need to be careful. The situation with Catherine and your mother is already complicated. Adding a romance with an employee into the mix. I know, Bradley sighed. It's a minefield. But Rich, for the first time in years, I feel alive. Like there's a purpose beyond just maintaining the Blackwood legacy. There was a moment of silence on the line. Then, Richard spoke, his voice filled with a warmth that belied his usual professional demeanor. Then I say go for it, old friend. Life's too short for regrets. God knows you've had enough of those already. As Bradley hung up the phone, he felt a sense of clarity washing over him. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult. There were legal battles to face, family wounds to heal, and a lifetime of expectations to overcome. But for the first time in years, he felt ready to face those challenges head-on. Rising from his chair, Bradley made his way out of the study, determined to find Lucia. He needed to talk to her, to explain, well, everything. But as he approached the kitchen, he heard voices and paused, not wanting to interrupt. And that's why I can't leave, Emily, Lucia's voice drifted through the partially open door. I know it might be easier to start fresh somewhere else, but this family needs me. Amelia needs me. Bradley's heart clenched at her words. He had been so caught up in his own emotional turmoil that he hadn't considered the possibility of Lucia leaving. The thought of Blackwood Manor without her warm presence suddenly seemed unbearable. But what about you, Lucia? Emily's voice asked. Don't you deserve to be happy too? There was a pause, and Bradley found himself holding his breath, waiting for Lucia's response. Happiness comes in many forms, Mija, Lucia finally said, her voice soft but resolute. For me, knowing that I'm making a difference, that I'm helping this family heal, that brings me joy. And who knows? Perhaps in helping them find their way, I'll find my own path too. Unable to contain himself any longer, Bradley pushed open the kitchen door. Both Lucia and Emily turned to look at him, surprise evident on their faces. Mr. Blackwood! Emily exclaimed, quickly straightening her apron. I'm sorry, I should get back to work. As Emily scurried out of the kitchen, Bradley's eyes locked with Lucia's. He saw a flicker of something, uncertainty? Hope? In her gaze before she looked away, busying herself with wiping down the already spotless counter. Lucia, Bradley said, taking a step closer. I couldn't help overhearing. Were you really thinking of leaving? Lucia's hand stilled, but she kept her eyes on the counter. It crossed my mind, she admitted softly. After everything that happened this morning, I thought it might be best for everyone if I just disappeared. No, Bradley said, more forcefully than he intended. Lucia looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the sudden panic that had gripped him. I mean, please don't go. We need you. I need you." Lucia's eyes widened at his words. "Bradley, I dash." But before she could finish, the kitchen door burst open once again. Amelia stood there, her face pale and tear-stained. "Dad!" "Lucia," she cried. "Come quick!" "It's grandmother. She's collapsed." The moment shattered, Bradley and Lucia exchanged a quick, loaded glance before rushing to follow Amelia. As they hurried through the manor's winding corridors, Bradley's mind raced. What new crisis was unfolding now? And would he ever get the chance to tell Lucia how he truly felt? They found Victoria sprawled on the floor of her bedroom, her face ashen and her breathing labored. Bradley fell to his knees beside his mother, panic rising in his throat. "Mother? Mother, can you hear me?" he called, gently patting her cheek. Victoria's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Bradley?" she whispered. I don't feel well." Lucia was already on the phone, her voice calm but urgent as she called for an ambulance. Amelia hovered in the doorway, her young face a mask of fear and confusion. As they waited for help to arrive, Bradley found himself looking to Lucia for guidance. She moved with quiet efficiency, propping Victoria up with pillows and checking her pulse. Her presence was a balm in the chaos, a steady anchor in the storm that seemed determined to engulf the Blackwood family. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and tense conversations with doctors. Victoria had suffered a minor stroke, likely brought on by the stress of the day's events. She would recover, the doctors assured them, but she would need time and care. As Bradley sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching his mother's chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, he felt the weight of the day's events crashing down upon him. How had everything gone so spectacularly wrong in such a short time? A soft touch on his arm startled him from his dark thoughts. He looked up to see Lucia standing beside him, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. "You look like you could use this," she said softly, offering him the cup. Bradley took it gratefully, his fingers brushing against hers in the process. Even in the midst of all this turmoil, that simple touch sent a jolt through him. "Thank you," he murmured. "Not just for the coffee, but for everything. I don't know how we would have gotten through this day without you." Lucia sat down in the chair next to him, her eyes filled with compassion. "Family takes care of family," she said simply. Bradley's heart swelled at her words. "Is that what we are to you? Family?" Lucia looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I care about you all very much. Especially Amelia. And you." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken emotions. Bradley opened his mouth to respond, to finally give voice to the feelings that had been building inside him all day. But before he could speak, the door to Victoria's room opened, and a nurse stepped out. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Your mother's awake. She's asking for you." Bradley nodded, standing up. He turned to Lucia, torn between his duty to his mother and his desperate desire to continue their conversation. Lucia seemed to sense his conflict. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Go," she said softly. "Your mother needs you. We can talk later." As Bradley entered his mother's room, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Relief at his mother's recovery warred with the lingering anger over her manipulations. And underlying it all was a growing certainty about his feelings for Lucia. Victoria looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, a far cry from the imposing matriarch she had always been. As Bradley approached, she reached out a trembling hand. "Bradley," she said, her voice weak but urgent. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." Bradley took his mother's hand, bracing himself for whatever revelation was coming. After the day's events, he wasn't sure how many more family secrets he could handle. "What is it, Mother?" he asked, trying to keep the weariness from his voice. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong," she whispered. "About everything. About Sophia, about the importance of the Blackwood name. I was so focused on preserving our legacy that I forgot what truly matters, your happiness." Bradley felt his throat tighten with emotion. These were words he had longed to hear for years, but had never truly expected. "I saw you today," Victoria continued, her grip on Bradley's hand tightening. "With Lucia. I saw the way you looked at her, the way she cares for our family. It reminded me of how you were with Sophia all those years ago. And I realized what I had taken from you." "Mother," Bradley began, but Victoria shook her head, determined to continue. "No, let me finish. I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know, whatever you decide to do, whoever you choose to love, you have my full support. I only want you to be happy, my darling boy." Tears spilled down Bradley's cheeks as he leaned forward to embrace his mother. Years of resentment and unspoken hurt began to melt away in the face of her sincere remorse. "Thank you," he whispered. I don't know if I can forgive everything right away, but I want to try. For all of us." As Bradley held his mother, he felt a shift within himself. The anger and bitterness that had been his constant companions for so long began to loosen their grip. In their place, a sense of hope began to blossom, hope for healing, for new beginnings, and for a love he had barely allowed himself to acknowledge. Gently releasing his mother, Bradley wiped away his tears and managed a small smile. "You should rest now, Mother. The doctors say you need to take it easy for a while." Victoria nodded, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "Promise me one thing, Bradley," she murmured as she settled back against her pillows. "What's that?" he asked, tucking the blanket around her. "Don't waste any more time," she said, her voice fading as sleep began to claim her. "Tell her how you feel." As Victoria drifted off, Bradley stood there for a moment, processing her words. She was right, of course. Life was too short for regrets and missed opportunities. He had already lost one great love because of fear and family expectations. He couldn't let that happen again. With renewed determination, Bradley left his mother's room and made his way back to the waiting area. His heart sank when he saw that Lucia was no longer there. Had she left? Gone back to the manor? Or worse, had she decided to leave for good? "Dad!" Amelia's voice cut through his rising panic. He turned to see his daughter approaching, a paper cup of hot chocolate clutched in her hands. "Is grandmother okay?" Bradley knelt down to Amelia's level, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "She's going to be fine, sweetheart. She just needs some rest." "Where's Lucia?" "Oh, she went to call home and check on her mother," Amelia replied, taking a sip of her hot chocolate. "She said she'd be right back." Relief washed over Bradley. She hadn't left. There was still time. "Amelia," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "I need to talk to you about something important." "About Lucia." Amelia's eyes widened with interest. "What about her? Is she in trouble?" "She didn't really steal anything, Dad." "I know she didn't." Bradley couldn't help but chuckle at his daughter's protective instinct. No, nothing like that. It's just, how would you feel if Lucia became a bigger part of our lives? If she was around more often?" A slow smile spread across Amelia's face. "You mean like, if she lived with us? All the time?" Bradley felt his face grow warm. Leave it to a child to cut straight to the heart of the matter. Well, maybe not right away, but something like that. Would that be okay with you? Amelia's response was to throw her arms around her father's neck, nearly spilling her hot chocolate in the process. It would be more than okay, she exclaimed. I love Lucia. She's like the mom I always wished I had. Bradley's heart clenched at his daughter's words. He had known for a long time that his marriage to Catherine had been a mistake, but he had tried to make it work for Amelia's sake. Now, hearing the longing in her voice, he realized that children saw and understood far more than adults gave them credit for. I love her too, sweetheart, he admitted softly, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly right on his tongue. Amelia pulled back, her young face serious. Then you have to tell her, Dad. Before it's too late. Bradley was once again struck by his daughter's wisdom. You're right, he said, standing up. I'm going to find her right now. As if on cue, Lucia rounded the corner, her cell phone clutched in her hand. She stopped short when she saw Bradley and Amelia, a question in her eyes. Is everything all right? She asked, her gaze flicking between them. Bradley took a deep breath. It was now or never. Lucia, can we talk? Privately? Lucia nodded, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Bradley turned to Amelia, who gave him an encouraging thumbs up. Why don't you go sit with grandmother for a bit, he suggested. The nurses said it was okay, as long as you let her rest. As Amelia skipped off towards Victoria's room, Bradley gently took Lucia's elbow and guided her towards a quiet corner of the waiting area. His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure she must be able to hear it. Lucia, he began, then faltered. How could he possibly put into words everything he was feeling? The gratitude for her unwavering support, the admiration for her strength and kindness, the growing affection that threatened to overwhelm him? Lucia looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with concern. Bradley, what is it? Has something happened? He shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. Yes. No. I mean, everything's happened. This whole day has been like something out of a soap opera. But through it all, there's been one constant. You. Lucia's eyes widened, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Me? But I haven't done anything special. I was just doing my job. Bradley reached out, taking her hands in his. He marveled at how small and delicate they felt, yet how much strength they held. No, Lucia. You've done so much more than that. You've been a rock for Amelia, a voice of reason in the chaos, a light in the darkness. Lucia's blush deepened, but she didn't pull her hands away. Bradley, Please, let me finish, he said softly. I know this is sudden, and probably completely inappropriate given everything that's happened. But life is short, Lucia. Too short to waste on regrets and missed opportunities. I've already made that mistake once, and I can't bear to make it again. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Lucia Hernandez, I think I'm falling in love with you. And if you'll let me, I'd like the chance to prove that to you every day for the rest of our lives. Lucia stood there, stunned into silence. A myriad of emotions played across her face, surprise, confusion, hope, and something else that made Bradley's heart soar. But what about Mrs. Blackwood? And your mother? And I'm just the housekeeper, Lucia stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Bradley shook his head, a soft laugh escaping him. Catherine and we've been over for a long time. We were just too stubborn to admit it. As for my mother, she's the one who encouraged me to tell you how I feel. And Lucia, you could never be just anything. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Tears welled up in Lucia's eyes, but she was smiling. I don't know what to say. This is all so unexpected. You don't have to say anything right now, Bradley assured her, though his heart was racing with anticipation. I know this is a lot to process. I just needed you to know how I feel. Whatever you decide, whether you want to give us a chance or not, your job at the manor is secure. I would never want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. Lucia looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Bradley's face. He held his breath, waiting for her response. Bradley, she began, her voice soft but steady. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about this. About us. But I never dreamed it could be possible. You're Bradley Blackwood. And I'm just Dash. The woman I love, Bradley interrupted gently. The woman my daughter adores. The woman who has brought more light and warmth into our lives than I ever thought possible. A tear slipped down Lucia's cheek, but she was smiling. In that case, she whispered, I think I'd like to give us a chance. If you're sure this is what you want. Bradley's heart soared. Without thinking, he pulled Lucia into his arms, lifting her off her feet in a joyous embrace. Her surprised laugh was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. As he set her down, Bradley cupped Lucia's face in his hands, marveling at the love and hope he saw shining in her eyes. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, sweet, and full of promise. It was a beginning, a declaration, a homecoming all at once. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Bradley rested his forehead against Lucia's. I love you, he murmured, reveling in the freedom to finally say those words. I love you too, Lucia replied, her voice filled with wonder and joy. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of clapping. They turned to see Amelia standing there, a huge grin on her face. Finally, she exclaimed, rushing forward to hug them both. Does this mean Lucia's going to live with us now? Bradley and Lucia exchanged amused glances over Amelia's head. Let's take things one step at a time, sweetheart, Bradley said, ruffling his daughter's hair. But yes, I think Lucia will definitely be around a lot more from now on. As the three of them stood there, wrapped in a group hug, Bradley felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, there were still legal battles to face, family wounds to heal, and a lifetime of expectations to overcome. But with Lucia by his side and Amelia's love to guide them, he knew they could face anything. In the days and weeks that followed, the Blackwood family underwent a transformation. Catherine, facing the consequences of her actions, agreed to enter a rehabilitation program. While her relationship with Bradley was beyond repair, they began the process of building a new, healthier dynamic for Amelia's sake. Victoria, humbled by her health scare and the realization of the damage her manipulations had caused, threw herself into mending her relationships with Bradley and Amelia. She even took it upon herself to publicly welcome Lucia into the family, shocking Millbrook's high society and effectively silencing any potential gossip about the unconventional romance. As for Lucia, she flourished in her new role. No longer just an employee, she brought her warmth and compassion to every aspect of the Blackwoods' lives. She encouraged Bradley to reconnect with his artistic passions, long suppressed under the weight of family expectations. Together, they established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, using the Blackwood fortune to create opportunities rather than simply accumulate more wealth. Amelia blossomed under Lucia's nurturing care, her natural empathy and intelligence shining through now that she felt truly secure and loved. The bond between them grew stronger every day, filling a void in both their lives that neither had fully realized was there. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, of old insecurities rearing their heads. Lucia sometimes felt overwhelmed by the drastic change in her circumstances, worried that she would never truly fit into Bradley's world. Bradley, in turn, had to learn to be more open and vulnerable, to trust in the love that had been so freely given to him. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their love growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. 1 year to the day after that fateful morning when Lucia had been falsely accused of theft, Bradley took her on a picnic to the rose garden she had so lovingly tended. As the setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, he got down on one knee and presented her with a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a simple band adorned with a single perfect rose, a symbol of their love's humble beginnings and beautiful blossoming. "Lucia Hernandez," Bradley said, his voice filled with emotion, "you came into our lives like a whirlwind, turning everything upside down in the most wonderful way. You've taught me the true meaning of family, of love, of what really matters in life. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy streaming down her face, Lucia nodded, too overcome to speak. As Bradley slipped the ring onto her finger, she pulled him up into a passionate kiss, pouring all her love and happiness into the embrace. Their moment of bliss was interrupted by a delighted squeal. They turned to see Amelia running towards them, her face alight with joy. "You said yes, right?" she called out as she approached. "Please tell me you said yes." Laughing, Lucia held out her hand to show Amelia the ring. "Of course I said yes, Mija. How could I not?" Amelia threw her arms around them both, nearly knocking them over in her excitement. As the three of them stood there, laughing and crying and hugging, Bradley marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a morning of accusations and betrayal had blossomed the most profound love and the truest family he had ever known. Life had a funny way of working out, he mused. Sometimes, the most beautiful gardens grew from the rockiest soil. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the rose garden, Bradley Blackwood looked at the two women who had become his whole world. Lucia, with her kind heart and unwavering strength. Amelia, with her infectious joy and boundless love. This, he realized, was true wealth. This was the legacy he wanted to build. In that moment, surrounded by the sweet scent of roses and the even sweeter presence of his family, Bradley silently vowed to cherish every day of this new life they were building together. For in the end, it wasn't the Blackwood name or fortune that defined him. It was the love he gave and received, freely and without condition. And as Lucia caught his eye over Amelia's head, her smile radiant with happiness and promise, Bradley knew that the best was yet to come. Their story, born from a moment of crisis and false accusation, had blossomed into something beautiful and true. A love that would stand the test of time, weathering whatever storms might come their way. For in each other, they had found not just love, but home.